what a wonderful makeup of talent and professionals who have joined us this afternoon. Thank you for being here. Now, behind me, I would have a set of slides that I would show you based on some very extensive research around what DE&I means to the B2B marketing community. But I'm going to take a terribly unscientific poll right now with the folks in the room, and I would like you to raise your hand if you, as a business leader, feel that DE&I is an important thing to address in your business. And by the way, DE&I stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So raise your hand if you feel that it's important to your organization. Okay, I'm not gonna shame you if you didn't raise your hand, but the stat that I would have put up is 9 out of 10 B2B marketers believe that DE&I efforts are important to the success of their organization. Now, I really wanna meet the one person who said it wasn't important. Because what we're about to talk about is, it's not just a moral imperative. It's not just something that we do to window dress and make our teams look more diverse. It's something that is incredibly important to the productivity of our organizations, because if you think about who we are and what we do as professionals, we're in the job of telling stories. We're in the job of making sure that we connect buyers to sellers. We're in the job where we have to fundamentally understand the very diverse set of people out there that we need to engage with as professionals. And if our teams are not built that way to reflect that kind of diversity of thought, then we're going to have a productivity issue in terms of our ability to be successful as business leaders. So my name is Jia Han. I lead strategic accounts in LinkedIn Marketing Solutions. And with me is Aditi Sharma, who is the Regional Vice President of Growth Business at Salesforce. Now that's what's on our official profile. And in conversing last week, we learned that we actually have a lot more in common beyond the fact that we lead sales organizations in our respective companies, but we actually come from backgrounds where when we were little girls thinking about what we wanted to be when we grew up, we weren't sitting there thinking, I want to grow up and be a sales leader in a tech company one day. Because one, it wasn't an option that was available to us, and two, we were probably not very likely candidates for the roles we occupy today. So we're going to talk about what's not on our LinkedIn profiles first. So what's not on my LinkedIn profile is my parents wanted me to grow up and be the most qualified wife to a global executive. And I just decided that I'm just going to be the person that I was meant to marry. So how about I turn it over to you? And I'd love to know, what did you want to be when you grew up, and your journey here?
Just thinking back, I think, a lot of women in India, at least the older ones who are in my age group, may relate to it. When I was growing up, I think there was a very clear demarcation. I come from a family of people who take education extremely seriously, not very uncommon in India. And there was a very clear demarcation that the smarter ones, the men usually did engineering, and the smarter women would go into medical. So obviously hearing that, seeing that in the family, I always thought I'll do medical, but the entrance exams, I failed in the medical exam. So I thought I'll try again. But my dad, told me that he took me out for a drive, and which was very uncommon for my dad to take a leave and take me out for a drive. And he took me to all these engineering colleges. And he knew someone. He took me into the workshops. We went to the lab. We saw lathe machines, and we saw Smithy machines, Smithy labs, etc. So when he showed me all of that, he said, "Look, this is really interesting stuff. So you can start thinking a little bit more, broaden your horizons. Don't just follow the path that was laid out to you by your, other people in the family." So that's how I got into engineering. But unfortunately, when I was passing out, 9/11 happened. So all the jobs that we got were rolled back. So I did the next best option available to me, that I continued studying further. So I did my MBA degree, but that's where I started, experimenting with internships, different roles. And I think I chanced upon a career in technology. And it's been about 19 years, never looked back, really, really enjoyed everything. But I think it's a combination of many multiple chances, taking risks, and just jumping in to experiment with things, and eventually it worked out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so one interesting fact that I learned at every single table I sat at today, I realized that I was either the only person or one of two people who did not have an engineering degree. So that's one thing I learned, is that everyone is incredibly proficient in engineering of many different kinds. The other interesting thing that I learned is that most folks who are working in marketing advertising today, particularly in the tech space, really came to their roles in a very circular twists and turns fashion. So there was not a single person that I met that pursued this linear path of undergraduate, graduate school to methodically kind of taking progressively larger roles. So I would love to know, what were some of the systemic benefits or barriers for that first job that you took in sales in tech?
When I look back and, I look back to everything that I've gone through in my career, I think one of the most important things that really helped me get more clarity of thought of what I should do next was through my mentors, right? I had an opportunity to have some amazing mentors who genuinely took interest in me as a person, in my career. They took time to meet me, understand what are my career goals. A lot of times, they showed me a different version of myself, which I didn't know existed. And when I came into the corporate world, all said and done, it's dominated by men even today. As much as we are trying to make it more equitable, but it's dominated by men. So I can't undermine the importance of male allies, right? I've had some amazing, out of the 18 years that I've worked in, professional world, I've just had one female boss. So my career really progressed when these male allies stood up for me, spoke for me, spoke in forums and times when I was not present, right? But they were vouching for me. Those were some of those two, I think, are one of the big factors. I think a positive and also a hindrance, systemic hindrance, is lack of role models. When I grew up, all through these years, I hardly had any role model who looked like me, who was going through very similar, broadly similar things that I was going through. And it took me 18 years to find the first real woman role model, and she happens to be our chairperson as well.
Wow.
Arundhati, who, a lot of folks here would know, she was the first, CEO of the largest public sector bank in the country. It's only when I saw her, I met her, I started spending time with her, I realized that there are so many things I thought were not okay for me to think or speak, but they were very normal. Very simple example, like Arundhati and I, we went for a meeting with very senior executives in an Indian organization. Both of us were wearing saris, the Indian attire, and the men were all suited up. And the air conditioning in the room was really chill because it was designed for the men who were sitting in the suit. And Arundhati stood up and she told the chairman that, can you please get someone to increase the temperature because we're really cold. And then she went on to tell him the importance of having, an inclusive mindset in smaller things as well.
Yeah.
So I think not having enough role models also made me question myself and doubt myself a lot of times. And I would really think that, systematically, if we can work towards that, that'll really help.
I want to talk a little bit about, because I think that all of us who have made these courageous career pivots owe a huge debt of gratitude to that someone or to a couple of people who really helped us, who gave us perspective. And you're talking about a very important role model in your life, but I think about the Salesforce culture overall. I remember the first time I had exposure to your CHRO. At the time, she was talking about how important it is for them to be the first large company that talked about pay equity, to look at racial diversity, to look at gender diversity, put hard numbers against that, and the board holding the executive team accountable to very hard metrics around these dimensions of diversity, because They embrace the fact that it is important for the productivity of the workforce. So tell me a little bit about I know you're formally involved in some of the structural programs as well, but would love to get an insight into your experience as leader in that organization.
Sure, I would love to talk about it. I've been here for 6 years, and if you see our corporate vision statement, one of the 5 core values for us is equality. And it's been a core value since our inception, right? It's a very important core value for us. We live that core value every day, and the way Salesforce, makes it more actionable is by forming. We have 13 equality groups. We call it business resource groups, and these 13 equality groups are actually, they have a global board comprising of employees from different parts of the world, different functions. And these 12 to 13 employees have an executive sponsor. And that executive sponsor is from a global executive leadership team. So that executive sponsor, and then we have got 2-3 advisors who are also very senior level people. But the whole idea is that we are the voice of the community that we represent. Yeah. I happen to be a part of the global board for Salesforce Women's Network. We collect a lot of feedback. We do a lot of deep listening. And the feedback that we collect, we have formal ways of going back and communicating to our leaders. But the most important thing, I think, where we really drive change is by designing what Salesforce, famously calls it V2MOM, which is defining a vision, defining our values, the methods that will take us to those values, the measures on how you will measure the methods that you're following, and the obstacles that's coming along the way. When we define it, and our V2MOM vision, very openly stated, is that we will bring 50% women in leadership team. And once you start defining these key metrics and you have associated measures related to it, we start holding people accountable. Yep. Now, each of our executives have their compensation linked to the diversity that is there in their team. Oh, wow. Yeah, so they have that diversity ratio. Our recruitment processes are now changed, where every single position that we recruit for, the panel has to be diverse, and most of our leaders send back the resumes if you do not have equal representation and diversity in that panel as well. So there are a lot of initiatives that we are taking on a daily basis, but it's important for us. The most important thing is, how do we measure? Because it's very easy sometimes to get lost in our day jobs. I run a sales team based out of India. Our president for Global Board runs another sales team based out of Australia. So it's very easy for us to get lost. It's very easy for our executive leadership team to start focusing on what's important to them. This actually brings that focus back. Yeah. So having these measurable goals for us is what drives us to achieve those goals as well.
I mean, that is the key differentiating factor, because I know so many organizations have employee resource groups, or as you call it, business resource group. I actually think that terminology itself is interesting, because it's not just an experience-oriented group. It is a group that really thinks about business. And to tie those hard metrics to an executive's compensation, I actually didn't know that part. So to put it plainly, as you're describing all of this, first of all, that is a lot of extra administrative work that we're putting on the part of managers and leaders. And so I imagine that there's a pretty strong justification and business case for why that's important, and why that's important ultimately for those leaders to embrace it, because it will help them be more productive and successful. So I'd love to know, one of the interesting things that came up in our conversation last week was I talked about how in designing my diverse sales team, I wanted to look across our customers and their customers and make sure that the diversity of our team reflected that diversity. And you have a slightly different take on it, so I wanted you to share that.
Yeah, sure. I think when you shared that you wanted to reflect what your customer's organization looked like, I think for us it was exactly the opposite. In India, we still go and talk to most of our senior leaders at a customer side happen to be men. And we want, like I said, we want to live our core values every day. So we want to put more women in front-end sales, so that not just, gender diversity, but bring sales people, sellers from across different parts of India is such a culturally diverse country. Yeah. So have people from different parts of the country who speak different languages,
Right.
who don't necessarily look all the same. And that diversity actually, how it helps us
Yeah.
is it brings real diverse thoughts to
Yeah.
the table. When you have a person, when you have three different people working in a team, working on the same account to close that deal, you will get three different ideas. But if you get the same type of people, same CRM sellers,
Right.
all men sitting in the room, they will use their past experience to say, this is exactly what you
Yeah.
need to do. We've seen, I have a team which has got about 40% women and 60% men, but I see there's so much of change in the way we interact as a group. Right? There's more sensitivity about very simple things. What time do we all hang out for team dinners? Now, team dinners have become team lunches. Once you create that inclusive environment, I think once you start making people feel comfortable, we've seen that it delivers amazing result.
Yeah.
In fact, we have spoken about it so many times in Salesforce. We do many trainings for our leaders, and almost every training, the first metric we show is it delivers. Diverse teams deliver 12% better business results as compared to homogeneous teams. So there is value in diversity.
In terms of revenue.
In
so
terms
bottom
of revenue.
line. Yeah.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Whatever is your KPI, it delivers 12% better result. And for us, it's delivered 12%
That's
higher
amazing.
ACV, that we call it, revenue for the sales
Yeah.
team. So there's a lot of programmatic things that we are doing. And I think that's why we believe that having a diverse environment really sends the right message to
Right.
everyone.
I mean, that's where the institutionalization of this is so helpful because you have hard metrics. Everybody's accountable for tracking them. So I imagine it's easy to aggregate those metrics. And it just makes it really clear in terms of what everyone's accountability is. And, I think about the past 3 or so years that we've all experienced. COVID, yes, but also working in the tech industry. I mean, we've experienced some pretty significant headwinds, economic downturn, some real hardships that generationally most of our workforce had never experienced before. And one of the benefits that I really saw coming out of the last 3 years is the diversity of the team really helps bolsters the resilience of the team. And in a time where, we're leading salespeople who are not hitting their numbers, who are not seeing the success that they're accustomed to, seeing how different people cope and help each other cope and figure out incredibly innovative ways to weather the storm together, I think it was one of the fringe benefits that I never expected in terms of how and why we built a diverse team in the first place.
I wanted to add, I think pandemic was a great leveler, especially for countries like India. Traditionally, even though I am educated, my colleagues are all educated, but there is somewhere, there's social barriers that come in front, the social norms that come in front that, the kids usually come to their mother when they have a problem. We all have a lot of house helps that we rely on to run our day-to-day lives. When pandemic happened, all of that vanished, right?
Yeah.
Both your mom and dad were at home. You had no help. So you had, both the father also and the, man of the house also contributing to doing work. And I think that, I call it a great leveler because the men in our group started realizing that, there is nothing at all which is a domain of a woman, right? Everybody can do this. And I think it created a lot of sensitivity and compassion towards both the genders, right? And that's really what we need. We need more. Of course, we don't want pandemic ever coming back, but we need to create an environment where we make sure that such levelers exist very programmatically. And as a part of Salesforce Women's Network Global Board, this is one of our charters, right?
Yeah.
We don't just shine spotlight on successful women leaders who are there in our organization and from outside, but we also shine a spotlight on our most important male allies. We tell them to come and talk about their stories. What were some of the challenges that they faced? How did they mentor some of the women employees? And what business benefit did you get? Because ultimately that's our goal.
Yeah.
To deliver business outcomes from a business resource group.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we talk about at LinkedIn a lot is there is a B at the end of DE&I for us, and the sense of belonging. So both the inclusion, but making sure that there's a sense of belonging that we create as leaders in our organizations through the storytelling, through the sharing, through the perspectives that we develop and the empathy that we develop about how other people are coping and creating success for themselves, I think sort of lends itself to really healthy, productive teams, and it's great for retention. It's great for retention, especially in markets where we have a talent crunch constantly in certain key skills, certain key sectors. I think if you really understand the importance of not just building diverse teams and making sure that there's equity in pay and equity in performance management, but just that last mile of making sure that people feel a sense of belonging and feel included in the way a business evolves goes a long way. So we could talk for hours and hours, and I just sort of made my best friend by virtue of being in this panel. But I want to leave this audience with some takeaways, because I recognize that not every company has that sort of incredible institutional structure that Salesforce does. So as everyone sort of leaves today and thinks about, well, what's my next step? What's my next best action when it comes to DE&I? What's the one takeaway that you'd love to leave for this group?
I think you spoke about belongingness. I was recently with my chief equality officer, and she asked me this question. She said, why are you in Salesforce for so many years? Is it because of the performance? Is it because of the incentive? And I had not thought about that for a very long time. I just enjoy my job. But I think the answer that I gave her is I can find another sales job in multiple organizations. But I think what I'm doing here as a stretch assignment of listening very closely to what women are going through and what do they really want to do, and having the ability to raise that voice in the right platform and see it through to conclusion, I think for me that brings a very strong sense of belongingness. So I think one advice that I would definitely leave for you all is, inclusion really makes a difference. But inclusion and, thinking about diversity and equality initiatives, it did not come to me naturally. I put an effort to learn more about it, to read more reports. I mean, the recent Nobel Prize for Economics just went to a Harvard professor who dedicated her entire career to learning more about, gender inequality as far as pay is concerned. So I think read more, learn more if you really want to build an inclusive mindset, because once you develop that inclusive mindset, you will have more conviction in your actions, in your communications, and you will ultimately start seeing the results of it as well. So that's one piece of advice that I would leave.
I love that. And I mean, we're going to be talking about creativity in B2B in the later sections today. And one of the essential elements or essential prerequisites for teams that are incredibly creative is making sure that people have a sense of psychological safety. And it sounds like a very, very fuzzy thing, but just in your story of having somebody ask you the question of why are you here, what keeps you here? I mean, maybe as a really practical next step, I think, all of us who are managers, that's an easy question to ask. And it's an easy conversation to have around, what are the intangibles that keep you here? And more importantly, what are the intangibles that give you that psychological safety that allows you to be your most creative self and allows you to make courageous decisions about how you do business? I want to thank you so much for this conversation. When we set up this conversation, I asked you, I just want to go really deep personally right off the bat. So I appreciate you being open to that approach. And thank you so much for this conversation.
My pleasure, dear. Thanks.